HOA. 6 police cars rolled onto my family's farm. The HOA board members were standing behind them, smiling like they had already won. They honestly believed they were about to take control of land that had been in my family for more than 100 years. They had lawyers. They had paperwork. They had police officers. They had confidence. What they did not have was the one thing that mattered most. They did not have the law on their side. So while everyone around me looked nervous, I simply pulled out my phone, started a timer, and waited. Before I tell you what happened, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Karen Stories Daily if you enjoy HOA stories, neighborhood drama, and unbelievable real-life conflicts. This story starts with arrogance, gets worse with greed, and ends in a way that nobody in that HOA expected. My family farm sits on the edge of a growing town. My great-grandfather bought the property more than a century ago. Back then, the area was mostly farmland and open countryside. Over the decades, the town expanded. New roads appeared. Businesses arrived. Housing developments followed. Through all those changes, our farm remained exactly where it had always been. The land was more than property to us. It was family history. Every field carried memories. Every building had a story. My father worked that land. My grandfather worked that land. Before them, my great-grandfather did the same. Several years ago, a large residential development was built next to part of our property. The neighborhood was marketed as a luxury community with walking trails, ponds, and beautiful views. Of course, it came with an HOA. At first, we had very little interaction with them. Most homeowners were friendly. Some would wave when they drove past. Others occasionally stopped to ask questions about the farm. The problem started after new board members were elected. Unlike previous boards, this group seemed obsessed with expansion. They constantly talked about increasing property values and improving community amenities. Then they noticed something. A section of our farmland sat directly beside one of their walking trails. It was a beautiful area with open views and easy access. Before long, rumors started spreading that the HOA wanted the land. At first, I ignored it. People gossip all the time. Then one afternoon, I received a letter from the HOA. The board expressed interest in discussing future opportunities involving our property. The wording sounded professional, but the message was obvious. They wanted to buy land. I politely declined. The farm was not for sale. A few weeks later, another letter arrived. This one included a purchase offer. The amount sounded impressive until you compared it to the actual value of the property. Again, I declined. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next year, the HOA became increasingly aggressive. Board members attended town meetings and discussed possible community expansion projects. Residents began approaching me with strange questions. Some asked when the farm would be sold. Others assumed agreements were already in place. I started hearing stories that the HOA planned to add parks and recreational areas where our fields currently stood. The strange part was that nobody from my family had ever agreed to anything. Then things became even more unusual. One board member knocked on my door and asked if I would reconsider selling. When I said no, his attitude changed immediately. He started talking about how development was inevitable. He suggested it would be easier to cooperate now rather than later. The conversation left a bad feeling in my stomach. For the first time, I began wondering whether they planned to do more than simply make offers. Months passed. Then I received a certified letter from an attorney representing the HOA. According to the letter, there were questions regarding property boundaries near parts of our land. That caught my attention immediately. The boundaries had been established for generations. Survey records existed. Property records existed. Everything was documented. Yet somehow the HOA claimed there might be uncertainty. I contacted my attorney. He reviewed the claims and laughed, not because the situation was funny, because the arguments were so weak. According to him, the records were extremely clear. There was no legitimate boundary dispute. That should have ended the matter. Instead, the HOA doubled down. Additional letters arrived. Additional claims appeared. Every few months, they found a new reason to challenge something. It became obvious that their goal was not to resolve a problem. Their goal was pressure. They hoped we would eventually become frustrated enough to sell. What they never understood was that my family had protected that land through economic recessions, floods, droughts, and multiple generations. A few HOA letters were not going to change anything. Then came the meeting that changed everything. A town council session was held regarding future development plans in the area. Several HOA board members attended. So did I. During public comments, one board member stood up and spoke about community growth. Then he made a statement that immediately got my attention. He referred to our farm as underutilized land that could better serve the public through residential expansion. I remember looking around the room. Several people appeared uncomfortable. The board member continued speaking as if the property already belonged to them. That moment revealed exactly how they viewed the situation. They did not see a family farm. They saw an obstacle, something standing between them and what they wanted. After the meeting, I spoke with several local residents. Many were shocked by the comments. Some had lived in the area their entire lives. They knew the history of the farm. They understood what it meant to the community. Support for our family grew stronger. Unfortunately, the HOA board did not seem to care. A few months later, I received news that completely changed the situation. My attorney called and asked me to come to his office. When I arrived, he showed me documents that had recently been filed. The HOA was attempting a legal strategy that was far more aggressive than anything they had tried before. For the first time, they appeared to believe they had found a path toward gaining control of part of the property. The details were complicated, but the goal was simple. They wanted land that did not belong to them. My attorney immediately began preparing a response. As we reviewed records, surveys, historical documents, and county filings, one thing became clear. The HOA had made a serious mistake, a very serious mistake, the kind of mistake that would eventually cost them far more than they realized. At that point, I stopped feeling frustrated. Instead, I became curious. Because the more confident the HOA became, the stronger our position actually looked. The months that followed were unlike anything I had ever experienced. The HOA board acted as if victory was only a matter of time. They continued pushing their claims. They continued spending money on attorneys. And they continued telling residents that the farm would eventually become part of the community's future plans. The strange thing was that the more they pushed, the stronger our case became. Every new filing created another record. Every new claim created another opportunity for them to make mistakes. My attorney remained calm through the entire process. Whenever I asked how things were going, he would simply tell me to be patient. Then one morning I received a phone call that changed everything. The HOA had arranged for what they believed would be a major action involving part of the property. Word spread quickly. Board members were excited. Several residents gathered to watch. Then 6 police cars arrived at the farm. Seeing that many police vehicles would make most people nervous. For some reason, I felt completely relaxed. In fact, that was the moment I pulled out my phone and started a timer. One officer approached me and explained why they were there. They had been asked to keep the peace during a property dispute. That immediately told me something important. The officers were not there to remove me. They were not there to seize land. They were simply responding to information provided by the HOA. A few minutes later, HOA representatives arrived carrying folders and documents. They looked extremely confident. One board member was smiling the entire time. It was obvious they believed this was their big moment. My attorney arrived shortly afterward. He greeted everyone politely and began reviewing paperwork. The atmosphere changed almost immediately. Within minutes, he started pointing out problems. Then more problems. Then even more problems. Several key documents relied on assumptions that had already been disproven by historical records. Certain claims ignored property surveys that had existed for decades. Some arguments directly conflicted with county records. The confidence on the HOA board members' faces slowly disappeared. The police officers stood quietly and listened. They quickly realized this was a civil dispute and not the situation they had been led to expect. My attorney then presented records that traced ownership of the property back through multiple generations. Every transfer was documented. Every boundary was documented. Every survey was documented. The evidence was overwhelming. The discussion continued for nearly an hour. By that point, the board members looked completely different from when they arrived. The smiles were gone. The confidence was gone. Even the officers seemed frustrated that they had been called out for something that should have been resolved long before reaching this stage. Then came the moment I will never forget. One county official who had been Reviewing the situation explained that the HOA's position had no legal basis. None. The property belonged to my family exactly as the record showed. The matter was clear. Just like that, everything collapsed. The board members began arguing among themselves. Some blamed attorneys. Others blamed previous decisions. A few simply stood there in silence. The 6 police cars that arrived expecting a major confrontation eventually left without taking any action. The officers shook hands with us, and we drove away. The crowd that had gathered slowly dispersed, and the HOA board members walked back to their vehicles looking completely defeated. But the story did not end there. The legal expenses continued. The HOA had spent a huge amount of community money chasing land they never had a right to claim. Residents eventually learned how much had been spent. They were furious. Questions started appearing at meetings. People wanted answers. People wanted accountability. Several board members resigned within the following months. Others were voted out. New leadership eventually took over. One of their first priorities was repairing relationships with neighboring property owners. By then, the damage had already been done. As for the farm, it remained exactly where it had always been. The same fields, the same buildings, the same family history. More than 100 years after my great-grandfather purchased the land, it was still ours. Looking back, the biggest mistake the HOA made was believing that confidence could replace facts. They assumed that wanting something badly enough would somehow make it theirs, but property rights do not work that way. History does not work that way, and the law certainly does not work that way. To this day, whenever someone asks why I started a timer that morning, I always give the same answer. Because I wanted to see how long it would take for reality to catch up with the HOA. The answer turned out to be less than an hour. If you were in my position, what would you have done after years of pressure from the HOA? Let everyone know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, share it with a friend and subscribe to Karen's Stories Daily for more HOA drama, neighborhood conflicts, and unbelievable real-life stories. Sometimes the people who arrive feeling the most powerful are the same people who leave with nothing.